Hi, I myself am vegan, and in this video I'm going to talk about a set of critiques directed toward veganism, sometimes from the inside and sometimes from the outside. So these are issues that are sometimes confronting vegans from non-vegans. Sometimes they're presented as excuses for why people aren't vegan, or they're given as a political rationale for why veganism is inadequate or immoral or bad. And sometimes they're engaged with those issues inside veganism from people who, I would say generally, are trying to transform veganism into more of a politically engaged movement, or people who want to impose a certain framework of social issues onto veganism in directing the movement forward, with different motives. As always, vegans are a diverse bunch. It's really misleading to characterize any one set of political motives when talking about veganism. One format that you encounter this in is in terms of capitalism and anti-capitalism, or consumerism and anti-consumerism. So under this heading, vegans are reproached as merely presenting a set of lifestyle choices, a set of consumerist options within a consumerist system, and failing to challenge that system. So under this heading, veganism is then reviled for not being anti-capitalist or not being anti-capitalist enough. That veganism is not revolutionary or not revolutionary enough, and that veganism does not challenge all oppression. It doesn't challenge all forms of human oppression, such as racism, exploitation of the poor, etc. Now, one reason why this critique is not going to go away, I think it's still going to be talked about 10 years from now, is that it's right. On a simple factual level, yeah, veganism is not a revolutionary movement. I also think that quitting smoking is not a revolutionary movement. Even the abolition of slavery, historically, and you can look around the world, in many social contexts, even though it transformed society in a fundamental way, was not a revolutionary movement. The abolition of slavery in Thailand took place under royal patronage from the top down, not from the bottom up. It wasn't a grassroots movement. It wasn't a slave rebellion, etc. The abolition of slavery in Sri Lanka took place under the British Empire from the top down. It was imposed on the society, not as a grassroots movement, not as a rebellion, etc. So history is full of these funny things. But, people don't quit smoking as a method of radicalization or revolution. They quit smoking with whatever mix of motives, health concerns, and trying to live a meaningful life, and so on. And a lot of people, both today and in the future, are going to engage with veganism in that same way, whether you like it or not. I've heard many people complain that they feel insulted when veganism is referred to as a diet. Well, most people eat 3 meals a day. They may go to one political protest a month. They may go to one political protest a week. But political activism is going to be a smaller part of their daily life than their diet. They are going to buy things. They are going to continue to be consumers. And consumerism is going to be part of their daily life, even if they define themselves as being anti-consumerist, anti-capitalist, minimalist, revolutionary, you name it. And the other broad concern I have, as I've already stated in previous videos, is that if you believe in veganism, then you believe that veganism is for everybody. And in that sense, it really is like quitting smoking. If you think that cigarettes are unhealthy, cigarettes are bad for you, then you believe that quitting smoking is for everybody. Not just left-wing people, not just right-wing people, not just people who agree with your particular set of priorities and concerns. And within veganism, I say this with all due humility, all of us individually, it's hard to find it in your heart to get along with other people who are vegan who fundamentally disagree with you, who fundamentally don't get along with you politically, religiously, or otherwise. I already mentioned, it's hard. If you find out Bill Clinton is vegan, if you find out George Bush is vegan, if you find out that somebody you knew in high school whom you hated, just on a personal level, you hated them in high school, and now today you happen to see their face on the internet and you find out they've gone vegan, do you have it in your heart to send them a message and say, hey, I'm so happy for you, I'm so glad you became vegan? Do you have it in your heart to work with them in a political movement to bridge those differences? It's tough. It's tough for everyone. It's tough for me. I personally, I have a really robust background related to Buddhism. Like, the real history of Buddhism, the real textual basis for Buddhist philosophy, a sort of hard social science approach to the reality of life in Buddhist cultures, not a rose-colored glasses approach to glorifying Buddhism. Well, when I meet other vegans who believe in a kind of mishmash of Eastern religions, kind of picking and choosing here and there from really bad translations into English of Buddhist ideas taken out of context and horribly misrepresented and misinterpreted. For me personally, it's really hard to sit at the same table with someone like that. It's really hard for me to get along with somebody who believes in a sort of ersatz pick and choose combination of elements of what they learned from their yoga classes and some book they bought at an airport about Buddhism. That's hard for me personally, okay? For someone else who's on the far left, it's going to be hard dealing with someone who politically is even a centrist, someone who's like a mainstream member of the Democrat Party or the Republican Party. These clashes are going to exist within Buddhism, and in that sense, sorry, I said Buddhism, I meant veganism. Both are true. These clashes are going to exist in veganism. And in that sense, you can compare veganism to the struggle to try to make a coherent social movement out of protests against nuclear power, protests against particular ecological disasters. When there's a toxic waste site. Well, it's not just left-wing people who are upset about it. You might have right-wing people. You might have people who are traditional hunters and then trying to work together. But I mean, the strength in any political movement comes from that ability to work together, not the ability to isolate yourself into a smaller and smaller group of people who agree with you ideologically and who don't challenge your preconceptions. To give one example that, again, it's visceral, it's hard to cope with. Anyone's reaction may be extreme. Vegans, by and large, support the complete abolition of vivisection, of testing on animals. If you want to know anything about what's really going on in vivisection, for your source of information, you tend to rely on moderate scientists who want to see vivisection used sparingly and occasionally, but scientists who are critical of the waste of money, waste of resources, and needless animal suffering under the current regime of how scientific research is funded. So, I mean, I have read some articles that were really illuminating from this type of moderate scientist who doesn't want to end vivisection totally, but who is skeptical of and critical of what's going on in vivisection, where they get into the details of some horrendous project where, sheep were tortured to death for no reason, and the way the study was designed, it couldn't have possibly learned anything. It just tortured these sheep to death. And those scientists are asked the question, look, we supposedly have a government process in place that evaluates these proposals in terms of their possible positive outcomes, the animal suffering, and the use of resources. And obviously that system doesn't work if projects like this are going ahead. I've also read some terrible descriptions of experiments where monkeys were being tortured to death, and the project could not have possibly discovered anything. These monkeys were really being tortured to death for no reason. And the scientists involved, he even quoted from the conclusion written by the researchers themselves, people who supported this vivisection. And, they were saying, they were admitting in their conclusions that what they found by torturing these monkeys had absolutely no salience to human health or human psychology or anything else. Okay, if you want to make progress in that area, you may think that strength comes from radicalism or extremism or trying to isolate yourself in a small group of hardcore activists who agree with your narrowly defined abolitionist approach, but it doesn't. Strength will necessarily come from working across that bridge with, in this case, moderate scientists who disagree with you to some extent, but who sympathize with and support the critique you're engaged in for their own reasons. They're probably people who want to see a much smaller number of animals being vivisected, but they are aware from the inside of how the grant application process works, of how the scientific establishment, the university establishment, the academics, how that operates. And those are the people who will tell you the details of how, monkeys are abducted from the jungle in Cambodia, the last inch of jungle being cut down, are put on airplanes and are sent to England, and how the commercial airline companies are protesting against that because they don't want to be involved in transporting these monkeys to be tortured to death in labs. And, those technical details will really inform your activism. It will inform your engagement with the issue. It may transform your life philosophically too. But if you want to make an effective difference, those are exactly the details you need to know. Those are the people you need to work with, even if they disagree with you. Okay? So strength is not going to come from isolating yourself in a narrow but deep group of people who don't challenge your own assumptions, your own ideology. Okay, I've told you what I'm talking about, and I've told you why I'm talking about it. Now I'm going to respond to a particular voice here on YouTube who is a vegan, criticizing veganism from the inside. She uses the online name A Privileged Vegan, and as that name suggests, she is framing her engagement with these issues in terms of privilege in veganism. She gets a lot of negative reactions, and she has her own critiques of other vegans online, because that issue of privilege, vegans are primarily used to hearing it in terms of a set of excuses for why people don't go vegan, why people refuse to become vegan, why they would prefer to maintain their own cultural heritage, their own traditions, or what have you. Now, she is not using it as such an excuse. She's engaging in a very different kind of social critique. But nevertheless, that explains the sort of hostility and reluctance of other vegans to hear what she has to say. I'm going to provide a link below this video to the particular video she posted, the particular video at A Privileged Vegan that I'm responding to here. However, what I have to say, you'll be able to understand fine if you've never seen that video, or if that video is deleted in the future, it doesn't exist, or what have you. Now, again, the particular video I'm choosing to respond to here, I chose it because I think it's worth talking about. I didn't choose the worst video or a video that I thought was stupid or pointless. I think these are important issues to talk about, and I can sympathize with where this person is coming from in launching these critiques of veganism. And I think this raises a bunch of problems that are not going to disappear. However, I've already stated my own bias, and my bias is that we have to learn to work together. We have to learn to bridge the types of terrible differences that separate us and isolate us as vegans, and that there is no utility in trying to instead deepen and retrench those differences to create mutually hateful, invidious cliques within veganism. And one of the reasons that goes on is that it's human nature. Left to their own devices, human beings will just organize themselves that way, especially in contexts where they're not making any money. That's kind of a whole other digression. Why does veganism look the way it does on the internet? For 90% of the stuff, it's the profit motive. There's such a difference if you compare the web presence, the YouTube channels, the statements, the written text of groups that are making money versus groups that are not making money. The groups that are making money, of course, we get all of this shallow stuff, how to lose weight, how to have a great-looking ass, how to clear up your acne, how to live a life of plenty and abundance and the power of positive thinking, all kinds of nonsense. All right, that's one side. But amongst those who are definitely not making any money, there's a small activist group called London Vegan Actions. They look like a pretty coherent group of friends. They were founded by two sisters who've been interviewed on the news and who've been written about multiple times. And, for them, I'd assume like any small group like that, they're not looking to recruit hundreds of people or thousands of people. They want to work with and spend time with like-minded people. And that's not a criticism. That's human nature. Like when I was doing activism at City Hall, if I'm getting involved in long-term activism of any kind on an issue, if you're going to work for years on a small scale with a group of friends on a political issue where you're never going to make any money, there's no fame, there's no other reward, for most people the reward they want is exactly to work with like-minded people. So it doesn't always come from a bad place in their hearts, but yeah, this is the kind of fundamental problem that can lead to veganism discrediting itself and veganism tearing itself apart. And it's also underlying what we see here and now in terms of the status quo. So, within the first minute of this video I'm responding to, the author sets out the view that there is a problem with digital vegans, with vegans online, stating or believing that veganism is an objective that justifies the means, any means used to get to it. Now that is an interesting point. It's an interesting point to open her video on, but I'm disappointed that she raises this point only in relation to what she feels are offensive objectifications of women's bodies, offensive use of language, basically shallow and gossipy material within veganism online. Posting up stuff about who's fat and who's thin out of the local tabloids. All of that deserves to be critiqued. Sure, engage in a critique of it. Let's try to make veganism more meaningful. Fine. Completely agree. However, when I heard her opening the video that way, she's talking about the ends justifying the means. I'm worried about eco-terrorism. I'm worried about vegans who actively glorify violence, illegal sabotage, illegal action, burning things down, smashing cages, etc., as their primary mode of activism. So the problem of the ends justifying the means is very real in veganism. But let's get real. The problem is not somebody making a comment on Twitter that offends you slightly. The problem is the primacy of anarchist and communist and, balaclava-wearing pseudo-radicals really glorifying violence. And the number of people who actually engage in that kind of violence is a very, very small percentage of the people who come on the internet and try to glorify and try to applaud it. Okay? That does discredit veganism. And it's a short-term and long-term problem and issue we're all going to be stuck with. And if you go to City Hall or you go to Parliament, wherever you live, yes, the shadow of violent anarchist activism can discredit and hang over whatever positive changes you're trying to make. The other stuff, the photographs of women in bikinis, all the kind of shallow and catty remarks, yeah, it's also an issue. It can also discredit veganism to a certain extent. The critique of that and complaints against that is also legit. But yeah, in terms of gravity and seriousness of the particular issue raised here of the ends justifying the means, that's not my primary concern. That's not the first thing that pops into my head. So she goes on in her second minute to raise the question of making the world vegan. Can this happen on its own? Is this viable as a single issue cause? Or is veganism ineluctably bound to other social issues, challenges raised against other forms of structural oppression, etc., etc.? Well, like it or not, yes, veganism can and will be pursued as a single issue cause. Yes, everyone in the world can quit smoking, theoretically, without any other social problems being solved. I may not like it. I may prefer to imagine that veganism is linked to a long list of social issues I personally happen to care about. But no, as a praxis, it isn't. And inevitably, it's going to continue to be pursued as an isolated single-issue cause by a great diversity of people with a great diversity of political and religious beliefs and so on. So in terms of working pragmatically with the world as it really exists, that's something we all have to face up to. If there were a neo-Nazi group on the internet who were promoting veganism, that would be a problem. But they probably already are. I just don't know about them. Probably that already exists. There are cult groups with, ridiculous supernatural beliefs who are promoting veganism and define themselves in terms of veganism. The association of veganism with breatharianism, other supernatural diets, diet beliefs and ideas of spiritual purity and so on. Yeah, it's a problem that we all have to deal with. But for that reason, it's really a good thing that veganism is separable as a single issue. It's really a political advantage for us that we can abstract or extract veganism from that context and say, look, I understand, you or this group of people, you're vegan because of a religious and cultural background. I understand you're vegan and you associate with these beliefs, and another group of people associate veganism with a set of political beliefs. But guess what? We can deal with this as a single issue, not to further divide us, but to give us some common ground to work on. She raises the question then. She's challenging vegans in her second minute of her video. Do we expect veganism to magically rebalance the damaging attitudes that we profited from along the way? So that quotation and that paraphrase doesn't make it clear what she's saying. But she's raising here a meaningful question of, if we have vegans believing that the ends justify the means, if we have vegans who are engaging in crass consumerism and capitalism, who are engaging in possibly racism, sexism, the objectification of women, a long list of things she thinks are politically offensive. If we are looking at a form of veganism that profits, that actually gets attention and sells diet books, or makes its money from these things, do we think that veganism will rebalance itself at the end of that process from what came along the way? I do think that is really an interesting question, and it applies to some aspects of veganism more than others. Those two sisters in England who started London Vegan Actions, I don't think that critique applies to them. They're going out in the streets and protesting in front of restaurants, try to get them to stop serving foie gras. Very simple, down-to-earth activism. They have different ways of kind of showing the vegan documentaries Earthlings and getting people aware of the issues. Very simple awareness raising, street protests and that sort of thing. I don't think, I don't think they're making any money out of it. I don't think they're commercializing anything. So no, in that case, that critique doesn't apply to them. And I think it's important to recognize there's a spectrum of things out there that are there to be criticized. However, when we talk about commercialized veganism, this reminds me a lot of debates from a few years ago about commercialized rap, commercialized hip-hop, where many people felt that rap music was supposed to have a sort of socially conscious core to it, that it was supposed to relate to and connect to activism and anti-establishment sentiments in a deep and fundamental way. And then as hip-hop both became more commercialized and more gangster in its content, and as it came to really exploit not just images of violence, but images of sexuality, even rape and what have you, in lyrics, many people raise the question, look, isn't rap going to discredit itself as a genre, as an art form? And to use the same language as video, is it going to be able to recover its image or rebalance at the end of that process? So rap music in the last few decades, a lot of people made money out of it. Some people made thousands of dollars. Some people made millions of dollars. And the commercialization of the music went the way it did for that reason. But yeah, there is a long-term impact. There are long-term repercussions and effects. I don't think rap music will ever be respected in the way jazz music is or in the way blues music is. Even though, like, the majority, if you look at the lyrical content, I mean, there are blues songs about cocaine. There are blues songs about getting drunk. There are blues songs about husbands beating up their wives or wives beating up their husbands. Like, the whole range of human misery is in blues music and jazz music also. However, I think anyone who followed what happened with rap music within my lifetime would say honestly, yeah, you know what? The commercialization of rap and the prevalence of certain kinds of violent themes in rap, yeah, that does mean that it's not going to be respected in the way jazz music is. So, okay, the thematic content of veganism today, whether it's the one extreme of have a beach body, go on vacation in Thailand, live a life of indulgence and, athleticism, yeah, that's going to have repercussions for how veganism is pursued. On the other end, violent movements, it's going to have repercussions. And I remain really concerned. Some of the most popular and influential forms of vegan organizations, which again are not dealt with by this particular person responding to, not dealt with by a privileged vegan. Worldwide, probably the most vocal, most successful vegan organization is run by Supreme Master Qinghai, who has a TV network called Supreme Master TV. They promote veganism. They own the largest chain of vegan restaurants in the world. They have this TV station that promotes veganism directly in connection with ecological issues, with anti-war and anti-violence issues. A lot of that may tug at your heartstrings in many ways, but they are also a fringe religious group, a new religious movement with supernatural and cultic beliefs that are, to me, shameful, that discredit them as a movement. And I'm worried about their success discrediting veganism as a movement. I'm worried that when I meet people in real life and I say I'm vegan, they look at me and think, this guy's a member of some kind of funny cult that believes in all kinds of crazy supernatural stuff. So yes, that is a problem. Veganism will be damaged by the attitudes that it has profited from exploiting along the way, commercially, politically, and otherwise. So far, pretty much everything I've said would seem to be in agreement with the person whose work I'm criticizing, the other video that I'm linking to below. However, I think that the person who made that video would not feel that I'm agreeing with her, because the examples I'm offering, the questions I'm raising, and my political concerns are so different from hers. So she's very concerned about, for example, a certain YouTube personality who is a former bodybuilder whose videos she finds very offensive. He's actually here in Canada. His name is Vegan Gains. Okay? So that's very different from the concerns I've been raising. And in the third minute of her video, she makes the claim that how we shape the vegan message will both impact who the message reaches and which inequalities it reproduces. So slipped in here in passing is the idea that simply by addressing the issues in what she considers a politically incorrect way, we are reproducing social inequality. So that's a hell of a claim to make in passing. If you believe veganism is for everybody, then you believe it's for all kinds of different people. You believe it's for athletes. You believe it's for people who watch football on the weekends. It's not me. I've never watched a game of football in my life. I've never watched a game of ice hockey in my life. Okay? I'm a bookish intellectual. I represent a very tiny minority of the population in Canada. I don't fit into my own culture very well at all. And there's no false humility about that. It's the way it is. Shaping the vegan message in different ways will reach different audiences, but I regard that as a fundamentally positive thing. The fact that I may recoil in horror at what vegan athletes have to say is one thing, but I'm not the audience for that. So I've got to have some degree of humility in engaging with people who come from those other backgrounds. Again, hey, we can all benefit from critique. There's nothing wrong with that. But boy, to leap from that claim to the idea that someone is guilty of reproducing social inequality because their approach to veganism is not the same as mine, that's a huge leap of inference that would need more explaining and more evidence. And, I don't buy it. I don't think that Vegan Gains is reproducing social inequality in trying to make money out of putting offensive videos on the internet. He's not the first to do it, and he's not the last to do it. A lot of people want to be an enfant terrible to draw attention to themselves, and there may not be a lot more to it than that. If you want to critique him for being shallow or offensive, fine. If you want to critique him for reproducing social inequality, good luck. At the 3-minute mark still, she suggests in her video, quote, shouldn't the learning process to become vegan also teach people to think critically about other forms of oppression that affect humans. Close quote. Okay, well, that's a question. The real world answer, like it or not, is no. The most successful forms of veganism right now are either completely motivated by superstition, various religious movements in Asia, and attempts to imitate them in the Western world. And on the other hand, we have this phenomenon of veganism being motivated by vanity that both of us are offering some kind of constructive criticism of. Veganism in order to make you more beautiful, fit into a bikini, ride a bicycle up and down a mountain in Thailand, all the rest of it. So for the majority of people who actually are vegan in the world, the learning process to become vegan probably is related to a magical idea of karma in both Chinese culture and Indian culture, sometimes catalyzed by a modern awareness that milk products really do entail bad karma, whereas traditionally they were believed not to. And this is sometimes linked to oppressive ideas of caste purity, that your social superiority is linked to your diet, sometimes very directly linked to beliefs about an afterlife or reincarnation, that you're going to go to the seventh heaven after you die instead of the fifth heaven, etc., if you adopt certain dietary practices, purity rituals, and so on. Okay? So no, people are becoming vegan without any connection to the issues of oppression that you personally may really care about. That may be sad, you may not like it, but that is the reality we have to work with pragmatically in the year 2015. You may want to believe that veganism is inherently about compassion as you define it. You may want to believe that veganism is inherently about anti-capitalism, anti-consumerism, or some revolutionary cause as you define it. It's not. And also, you don't get to define it. And neither do I. And strength in any political movement, especially a political movement as tiny as what veganism is in the year 2015, it's never going to come from building up those invidious walls of division between you and the only other people who could possibly have a common cause with you, who could possibly support you and appreciate your work on YouTube, work with you in real life, start a foundation, start an NGO, start writing letters to Parliament, start taking a case to City Hall, whatever the cause is. Man, the only strength and the only momentum you're going to get is going to be from learning to work with people across those divides.